know all of these vessels, okay? What we're doing is a different flow. And let me explain that. This is the diagram you have in your lecture notes. It may not look quite as scary. So remember, venous blood is draining back into the inferior vena cava. So venous blood from the kidneys is going back into the inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava is formed by the vessels carrying venous blood from the lower extremities and the pelvis back to form the inferior vena cava. Veins from our gonads are going back to the inferior vena cava. All right? Now, the big exception are the organs that we have for digestion and the spleen. So we have the stomach. We're absorbing alcohol, drugs, mainly. All right, very little else. The small intestine, which is where we absorb our amino acids and our glucose. Lipids, by the way, take a lymphatic pathway back to the heart, and we'll talk about that in our next unit. We have the large intestine. We're absorbing mainly vitamin K and water. And all of that is used by the body during metabolic activities. So what is the largest organ of the body outside of the skin? What's the largest organ inside the body? Largest and most active metabolically? The liver. So rather than send all this material to the heart and then divide it up amongst the body parts with the liver getting, just a small portion of it, all of this material is sent to the liver first. Remember with the pituitary system and the hypothalamus, we talked about the portal system? And we had the capillary bed 1 in the hypothalamus picking up the releasing factors and being carried down the portal vein to the anterior pituitary and delivering it without having to go through the heart. We have another venous portal system in the digestive tract. So where would capillary bed 1 be? Where are we picking up material? In the capillaries of not the liver, small intestine, stomach, large intestine, and even the spleen. Okay? And then the second capillary bed is in the liver. So all of that is sent to the liver first, and it gets first dibs. It takes amino acids out and makes clotting proteins and transport proteins and osmotic pressure proteins. It takes the glucose out and stores it as glycogen. In case you don't eat for 4 or 5 hours, it can then release it. Okay, so that is so we have arteries going to the small intestine, breaking down to arterioles and capillaries, picking up the nutrients, and then the veins carrying those nutrients to the liver, and capillary bed again, allowing the dispersion of that material to the liver. So that's why we don't see a superior mesenteric vein, gastric veins, inferior mesenteric veins. They are here, but they are going to the liver first, all right? And so that is the difference between this and the arterial system. So in this diagram, don't worry, I'll be drawing on the board as well. In this diagram, here's actually let me do the next one because it has a small intestine on it. Here's the superior mesenteric, picking up material from the ascending colon and the small intestine. Here's the inferior mesenteric, picking up material from the large intestine, vitamin K. Here's the splenic. Here's the gastric veins, and they're all coming together and forming the portal vein. Makes sense, it's a portal system, and carrying this blood into the liver, where it now enters large capillaries or sinusoids, and we'll cover that detail in the digestive system. And then it leaves the liver through hepatic veins to finally get to the inferior vena cava. All right, now normally, when we have an artery and a vein from an organ, we have the artery coming into the organ and then the vein carrying blood out of the organ. So the artery coming in and the vein coming out are at the same location and blood's flowing in opposite directions. Here, we have the hepatic arteries going to come into the liver with the portal vein. So the hepatic artery is bringing oxygenated blood and it's actually carrying the lipid material to the liver. And the portal vein is bringing the nutrients, and the two are mixed together and into a common large capillary, those sinusoids we mentioned on Tuesday, and through the sinusoids percolating through the liver. Now what other situation, even though we haven't talked about it yet, what other situation can you think of where we have oxygen-rich blood and nutrient-rich blood going to the liver in one vessel?
Isn't it the fetal?
Exactly. So on Tuesday, when we talk about fetal circulation, where does the baby, where does the fetus get its nutrients? From the mother, from the placenta. Where does it get its oxygen? From the placenta. So the umbilical vein coming into the fetus's body, like I said, we'll talk about this on Tuesday, but here's the umbilical vein in red coming in, and guess where it goes first? To the liver. Okay? So we reproduce that situation after birth by having the hepatic artery and portal vein going together into the liver. Now we do have a vein leaving the liver, as I said, to carry those components away, and that's the hepatic vein. So let me draw the inferior vena cava first without the digestive veins, and then we'll do those separate. And again, all of these are ones that you have heard of before. You just have them maybe ending up in a different location. So inferior vena cava is formed by the union of common iliac vein. And this would be our inferior vena cava. Okay, draining into the back of the inferior vena cava, we have lumbar veins. Now we talked about the lumbar veins going into the ascending lumbar or azygous and hemizygous veins. So they can do both, all right? I'm not going to emphasize that, but people are going, wait a minute, I thought we had. And so here would be veins coming from between the muscles, and we have veins coming from the spinal cord as lumbar veins. These are both lumbar veins, okay? And they can drain either into the vessels that are going to become the azygous vein, or they can go into the inferior vena cava. You don't have to worry about these over here. I'm just explaining pictures that you'll see in your lab activity, the study guide, okay? But we still have the lumbar veins, just like we had the lumbar arteries. Okay, now, normally, what was the last artery I drew on Tuesday? The inferior mesenteric artery, but that's not going to drain into the inferior vena cava, so we won't draw that. So the next artery we're going to talk about are the gonadals. So the right gonadal vein, ovarian or testicular, is going to drain into the inferior vena cava. The left one does not. The right kidney is usually a little bit lower than the left kidney. It's thought because of the large liver that's on the right side. So that might have suppressed development and not allowed the right gonadal vein to drain into the renal vein. But our left renal vein drains into the our left gonadal vein drains into the left renal vein directly. So we have a little bit of a difference here. Same vessel, same name, just a different place where they drain into the ascending blood supply. So sometimes, okay, all the time, on the lecture exam, I ask a question, which of the following veins drain into the inferior vena cava? Or all of the following veins will drain into the inferior vena cava except. All right? So obviously, common iliac veins will drain into the inferior vena cava. They form it. Lumbar veins will drain into the inferior vena cava. Does inferior mesenteric vein drain into the inferior vena cava? No. All right? Right gonadal vein will drain into the inferior vena cava. Left gonadal vein will not. Both renal veins do. All right? So now we have our adrenal glands. And I used to call these superior, middle, and inferior adrenals, and then Jeff Shangaris got upset with me. And he said, you can't find those names anywhere in an atlas. And I said, but they're in the same place. So to keep him from getting mad at me, I'm going to draw them in there, but we'll just call them adrenal veins, okay? So you can tell him I'm giving in to him. So here we have an adrenal vein and an adrenal vein. So same variations, but all you have to identify it is an adrenal vein. You don't have to worry about superior or middle or inferior. And this is easy because you can see it draining the adrenals. Okay? Now we're almost done. What was the very first vessel branching from the aorta when we pass below the diaphragm that you have on your diagram? Inferior phrenic. All right? So we have inferior phrenic veins. And then the last one we're going to put on there are the vessels draining from the liver. We have 2 large lobes from the liver, so we'll put at least 2 hepatic, oops, wrong color, 2 hepatic veins. So those are the vessels that drain directly into the liver. It doesn't look quite as scary as that first slide that I put up there. That just had a lot of lumbar veins on it. So notice we have no inferior mesenteric, no gastric, no splenic, no superior mesenteric, no superior rectal, no left colic, none of that. Do they exist? Yes, but they're going to be formed, they're going to affect the superior mesenteric artery travels with the superior mesenteric vein. All right, the inferior mesenteric vein happens to be a little bit longer because it has to come up high rather than going into the inferior vena cava down low. So here's our inferior vena cava and some of the other vessels, but here is the portal vein. It's about 3 inches long. And it is formed by the union of our superior mesenteric vein and our splenic vein. All right? So rather than, I could lay that over all of this, but I think it would make that messy and hard to figure out, so I'm going to draw it over here separately. So coming from the right side, remember, is our superior mesenteric because it's draining the right ascending colon and all of the small intestine. So that is superior mesenteric vein. And in its location, it's traveling with the superior mesenteric artery, okay? We're gonna find the superior mesenteric artery right here. Coming from the spleen and traveling with the splenic artery. So we have this smaller model here. Well, let's see. So here's the posterior view of the stomach. So here's the splenic artery coming off the celiac trunk. Here's the splenic vein. Okay. Here is the superior mesenteric artery, and right beside it is the superior mesenteric vein. So we still find them side by side. There's the celiac trunk. There's no celiac vein. Instead, we have this vessel right here, formed by the splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein, and this is the portal vein. Okay? So that's a lecture type question. Which of the following vessels join together to form the portal vein? And the answer is superior mesenteric vein and splenic vein. Now I'm missing a few, so I'll still add them in. And these vessels form the portal vein. The hepatic artery is going to go into the liver right there along with the portal vein. The inferior mesenteric vein drains into the splenic. Okay. We're going to have the superior mesenteric vein coming from the top of the rectum, and the left colic vein coming from the descending colon, forming the superior mesenteric vein. Inferior mesenteric vein. Now I'm missing the left gastric, okay? And the left and the right gastric coming from the inner curvature of the stomach drain into the portal vein directly. So we'll just put gastric veins. And you can see those right here. So if I were to say trace a drop of blood from the stomach to the heart, you would go gastric vein, portal vein, liver. You don't have to worry about all the stuff inside the liver yet. How would we leave the liver and get to the inferior vena cava?
Hepatic vein.
From the hepatic veins, and then would be in the inferior vena cava and the heart. Okay. If I said trace a drop of blood from the top of the rectum to the heart, you would go superior rectal vein, splenic vein, superior rectal vein, inferior mesenteric vein, splenic vein, portal vein, liver, inferior vena cava, hepatic vein, inferior vena cava, heart.
Gastric vein,
Portal vein. Right. So we just, instead of going into the aorta, we go to the portal vein, to the liver, to the hepatic vein, and then to the inferior vena cava. Okay, any questions on that? So the only new blood vessel we have is the portal vein. It's just where we see it going that's a little bit different. All right? All the other veins, and then the left gonadal vein going into the renal vein. But they're all, the left gonadal vein is found with the left gonadal artery. They're going to travel together for the most part. All right,
Where's the left colic vein?
left colic vein is right here. So inferior mesenteric vein and the left colic vein draining into it and superior rectal vein draining into it. Now, people get liver cancer, people get hepatitis, people get liver cirrhosis of the liver, and pressure backs up. The lower part of the esophageal veins will drain into the portal vein, and as pressure backs up, this can cause varicose veins of the esophagus. They can rupture, and the individual starts throwing up blood, pumping up blood. Pressure can increase in other superficial veins of the abdominal cavity, and this condition appears where varicose veins of the abdominal wall appear due to high blood pressure or pressure in the liver that's backing it up. This is called caput medusa. Medusa was the Greek goddess woman that snakes for hair. All right, so those are just signs of increased pressure in the inferior vena cava and chordal system. And hemorrhoids can occur. So we talked about the rectal arteries, superior, middle, and inferior rectal arteries. All right, so when pressure increases in the veins, then hemorrhoids can occur. So we're diagramming the pelvic. These are the middle rectal veins. So when they swell, that causes an internal hemorrhoid. External hemorrhoids occur when inferior rectal veins are under high pressure. So this can occur with a woman who's in labor, who's pushing really hard. Okay, we often see hemorrhoids more often in guys because they have stronger abdominal muscles and can increase the intra-abdominal pressure. If they bear down, trying to have a bowel movement or whatever. One of the students in my morning class was talking about a weightlifter who was, I don't know if he was in the Olympics or some contest, and you use your abdominal muscles for body support, and he popped a hemorrhoid out while he was doing the contest. I don't know how the guy knew, but anyway. So he's like, yeah, that increased intra-abdominal pressure keeps the blood, causes the blood to back up. So let's look at the pelvic system. We just did the pelvic for arterioles, and it's exactly the same. Okay? Saying no change whatsoever. Same branches, same vessels. So let me show it to you here on the arterial system. Like I said, I don't know why all the stuff today was fuzzy, but anyway. Here's the rectum. Okay? Anal canal. This muscle right here is levator ani. Okay, forms the bowl of the pelvis. Here's the inferior vena cava and the two common iliacs. So this vessel right here is the superior rectal vein going up to join the inferior mesenteric vein going into the liver. All right? Common iliac is formed by the union of the internal iliac vein and external iliac vein. Coming off of the internal iliac vein is the middle, or draining into it, is the middle rectal vein. And then the inferior rectal vein drains into the internal pudendal vein, which then joins the inferior rectal as well. All right? So the same pattern that we saw with the arterial system. So I'm going to move this diagram up and just briefly do the pelvis, but again, it's exactly the same pattern. Anybody need pictures of this before I erase it? Everybody okay? Okay. Again, if you have netters, this is from Netters. And even if you don't, you can find it online. It sometimes has all the little Elsevier tree in the background and stuff. You can definitely see it. All right, so inferior vena cava, common iliac. I can draw better than that. And draining into the common iliac internal iliac. All right? So we'll put inferior vena cava. And then forming the common iliac vein will be the external iliac vein and internal iliac vein coming together. Okay. So the inferior rectal vein is going to drain into the internal pudendal vein. This would be the rectum right here, by the way. Okay, so I suppose I could draw that in. This guy has a very long pelvis. And then that's going to drain into the internal iliac. Middle rectal vein will drain directly into the internal iliac. So the same branches we talked about that were arteries. And then obturator vein is also going to drain into the internal iliac. Now, as I indicated, there's other veins. Veins from the bladder, veins from the prostate gland, veins from the uterus. I just haven't talked about them, but I want you to know that those organs are all going to be supplied by branches of the internal iliac or be drained by branches of the internal iliac.
Professor?
Uh-huh.
So both of those things coming off of the interior,
Internal pudendal?
yeah, both of them are the
This is
interior.
a continuation of the internal pudendal towards the clitoris or the penis. Its name actually changes to become the superficial or deep perineal vein, but we're not going to go that far. Those are just further terminal branches of the internal pudendal. Okay. And that's traveling with the pudendal nerve. So if you remember where the pudendal nerve was when we did reproductive anatomy, the artery and vein traveling with it is called the internal pudendal artery and vein, and they're found with the pudendal nerve. If you remember the pudendal nerve, these are found in the same location. Okay. Now let's do the lower extremity. Again, it's going to be exactly the same as the arteries that we talked about, with the exception of the two new superficials vessels that we're adding. So, internal iliac, and then continuing from the internal iliac, we have the external iliac. And after it passes, I'll label it in a moment, after it passes under the inguinal ligament, well, let me, it's actually, I'm drawing it the wrong direction. I need to draw it from here up. Okay, it's going to become the femoral vein. So let's do it the right direction. So what veins draw the bottom of the foot? What arteries supply the bottom of the foot? Medial and lateral plantar veins. Okay? So draining the bottom of the foot, we're going to have the medial plantar vein from the big toe, and from the little toe, we're going to have the lateral plantar vein, and those are going to join together to form the posterior tibial vein. Look familiar? So medial plantar vein from the bottom of the foot, lateral plantar vein from the bottom of the foot, big toe versus little toe. Okay. And then the posterior tibial vein wraps around under the medial malleolus and up the back of the leg. So this is posterior tibial vein. Okay, so same thing as we saw with the arteries, but blood flowing in the opposite direction. Posterior tibial vein is going to come up towards the back of the knee, and it's going to be joined from the front by the anterior tibial vein. So across the top of the foot, we have the dorsalis pedis vein. I'm going to draw this as a solid line because it's on the front. So across the top of the foot, dorsalis pedis vein, and then up the front of the leg. It passes between the tibia and the fibula to join posterior tibial. So anterior tibial vein and dorsalis pedis. So what do you think, what vein do you think we form when the anterior tibial and posterior tibial join together? Popliteal, the one that's behind the knee. Okay, that's posterior, so we'll keep drawing that as a dotted line. I'm going to have a very short thigh here. Popliteal vein, behind the knee. And then as it passes through the adductor magnus, it becomes medial and anterior, and that is our femoral vein. And after it passes under the inguinal ligament, we call it the external iliac vein. And after it joins the internal, it becomes the common iliac vein. Okay? I'm missing one vein, one deep vein, and that is in the lateral compartment. What do we call the vein from the lateral compartment? Not saphenous, this is a deep vein. Fibular. So we have a fibular artery, so we have a fibular vein. So I'm going to draw that in a dotted line. What vein does it drain into? Posterior and tibial vein come together to form the popliteal vein. Fibular vein drains into the posterior tibial. Fibular artery is a branch of the posterior tibial. So here's our fibular vein. Draining into posterior tibial. So those were all the vessels that we talked about at the beginning of class that were arteries of the lower limb. Okay, and these are the veins that accompany them. So if we look at our wire model, which these work best for the azygous system and the extremities. Here's the arterial system. Common iliac, internal iliac, external iliac, femoral vein, femoral artery. Just above where it branches, we have the popliteal artery. It's going to branch to form the anterior tibial artery and the posterior tibial artery. And the lateral branch off of the posterior tibial is the fibular. All right? Now let's look at the same thing with our venous side. Here is the posterior, let's turn around so you can see it, posterior tibial vein. And the reason I know that is because the fibular vein is draining into it. A little short here. Fibular vein. The posterior tibial vein joins with the anterior tibial vein to form the popliteal vein. The popliteal vein then becomes the femoral vein. Femoral vein becomes the external iliac, joined with the internal iliac to form common iliac. And I said we had two superficial veins. All right? One drains into the popliteal. So three vessels drain into the popliteal vein. The anterior, posterior, anterior tibial and posterior tibial, which form the popliteal, and then the small saphenous, which drains into the popliteal. All right? There's no small saphenous artery. So we don't have any other branches off the popliteal that you need to know, except for the anterior and posterior tibial arteries. But the small saphenous drains into the popliteal. Now on this model, it shows it coming in from the side. It's actually right behind the posterior tibial. I can't draw it right behind it because then you wouldn't be able to see it because it's behind the posterior tibial. So I often illustrate its location by describing, none of us was alive during World War II, okay? Not even me. Back then, women wore real silk stockings, and they were sewn. So there was a seam. And part of being properly dressed, not having your lipstick run and your mascara run, was to have that seam go up the back of your calf in a straight line. You didn't want it wiggling around. So when there wasn't any silk available because the country was using it to make parachutes, women had to go to parties without stockings. So they would take pens and draw on each other a line up the back of their calf, right in the midline, to make it look like they were wearing stockings. So if you were to draw a line right up the back of the middle of your calf, a quarter of an inch to half an inch below that, deep to that, you would find the small